Anini, the gunshot cracked through the night air before anyone had time to run. A police officer dropped to the ground, his colleagues scattered behind their vehicles, hearts hammering, hands shaking. Their checkpoint, which had stood firm all week, collapsed in seconds. Tires screamed against tarmac as headlights swung hard around the corner and disappeared into the dark, swallowing the sound and the men inside with them. By the time reinforcements arrived, there was nothing left but shell casings, a wrecked patrol car, and the fading echo of an engine none of them could catch. One officer stood in the middle of the road, looked at his commanding officer, and said what every man at that checkpoint was already thinking. It was him again. The commanding officer said nothing. He just stared at the empty road stretching into the darkness. Because what could he say? They had set up this checkpoint specifically to catch one man. They had received intelligence. They had positioned themselves perfectly. And still, he had slipped through them like smoke through a closed fist. This was Benin City, 1986, and the name on every frightened lip, whispered in market stores and spoken in hushed tones across police stations from Benin to Warri, was Lawrence Nomanyagbon Anini. But nobody called him Lawrence. They called him Anini the Law, because it was beginning to seem like the law simply did not apply to him. Before you go any further, if you love true Nigerian history, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe right now. Hit that bell, because this story is only getting started. To understand how one man brought an entire region to its knees, you have to go back to where it all began. Not in a gang hideout, not in a prison cell, but in a quiet community not far from Benin City, sometime around 1960, in what was then Bendel State, the land that would later split into Edo and Delta states. Anini was not born into power. He was not born into wealth. He was born into the kind of ordinary that forgets you exist unless you force it to pay attention. As a young man, he made his way to Benin City the same way thousands of other young men did, chasing opportunity, chasing survival, chasing something that felt bigger than the village he had grown up in. The city was loud and fast and full of possibility. He found work doing what many young men with no formal connections found work doing. He became a driver. And this, as it turned out, was where destiny made its first move. People who knew Anini behind the wheel said it was something almost frightening to watch. He had an instinct for machines that you couldn't teach. He knew how a road would bend before the headlights hit it. He knew how to push a car past its limits and bring it back without losing control. In another life, another time, another country, a talent like that might have taken him somewhere entirely different. But this was Nigeria in the early 1980s. The economy was bleeding. Oil money had come and gone like a promise nobody intended to keep. Jobs vanished. Young men with no connections and no cushion found themselves staring into a future that offered them nothing. Somewhere in that gap between the life Anini wanted and the life the world was willing to give him, something broke. Nobody agrees on exactly how it happened. Some people who knew him say he fell in with the wrong men gradually, one small compromise at a time. Others say the shift was faster and more deliberate. But what everyone agrees on is this: when Anini entered the criminal world, he didn't enter it quietly. He entered it behind a steering wheel. In robbery operations, the getaway driver is everything. The plan can be perfect, the timing can be perfect, the targets can be perfectly chosen. But if the driver panics, if the driver hesitates, if the driver takes a wrong turn under pressure, everyone goes to prison, or worse. Anini never panicked. He became the most valuable man in any operation he was part of. And it didn't take long before he stopped being a part of someone else's operation and started running his own. His gang moved across Bendel State like a storm system, appearing suddenly, striking hard, and dissolving before anyone could organize a proper response. Armed robberies, car hijackings, attacks on police patrols, each operation carried out with a precision that left investigators baffled and witnesses shaken. One market trader in Benin City, who witnessed the aftermath of one of the gang's operations, described it years later like this: "We heard the shots. By the time we came out, it was over. The cars were gone. Nobody saw their faces clearly. It was like they were never there." That invisibility became Anini's most powerful weapon. Because as the operations multiplied, so did the whispers. And the whispers became something else entirely. They became legend. Police posts began to receive reports of the gang operating in different parts of the state almost simultaneously. How could one gang be in two places, three places? Either the reports were confused, or the gang was bigger than anyone had imagined. Either way, the authorities were struggling to build a clear picture of who they were actually dealing with. And that uncertainty was where the legend grew its teeth. By mid-1986, entire neighborhoods had changed their routines. Market women packed up earlier. Taxi drivers, the very same profession Anini had come from, began refusing certain routes after dark. A checkpoint that had stood on a major road for months was suddenly seen as a target rather than a protection. People stopped trusting that the uniform meant safety, and they started saying it more openly, more seriously, with less and less laughter in their voices. Anini is the law. Inside the police command, the pressure was becoming unbearable. A senior officer reportedly slammed his hand on a table during a briefing and said, "We have checkpoints on every major road. We have informants. We have more officers deployed than at any point this year. So somebody explain to me, how is this man still operating?" Nobody in that room had a good answer. What they suspected, but couldn't yet prove, was that Anini had something even more dangerous than guns and a fast car. He had friends inside. Rumors of police complicity had begun circulating almost from the moment the manhunt intensified. Too many close escapes, too many operations that seemed to happen just after patrols had moved. Too many moments where the intelligence was good, but the timing was inexplicably wrong. This, more than anything, was what made Anini's story different from an ordinary criminal story. It wasn't just about a man. It was about a system that in some corners had decided to look the other way. And that realization, when it began to sink into the public, ignited something beyond fear. It ignited fury. If you are watching this and your jaw is on the floor right now, drop a comment below. Tell us, did you know this story before today? Because what comes next is the part that Nigeria never forgot. The manhunt escalated to a scale the region had never seen. Additional units were deployed from outside Bendel State. Senior officers took personal charge. The pressure from above was enormous, because by now Anini's story wasn't just a local crisis. It had become a national conversation. Newspapers ran his name on their front pages. Radio stations discussed him openly. And somewhere in the noise, Anini himself seemed to absorb the attention the way fire absorbs air. The more famous he became, the more untouchable he believed he was. People close to him later said that in the final months of his reign, he had changed. The careful, calculated operator who vanished like smoke had started to feel invincible. He moved with a confidence that had tilted past bravery into recklessness. He began to believe the story the streets were telling about him, that he was beyond the reach of any law, any trap, any man with a badge and a gun. That belief was his beginning of the end, because while Anini was busy believing his own legend, a determined team of officers was quietly and methodically doing what no one had managed to do before. They stopped chasing the ghost and started studying the man. They tracked patterns. They followed contacts. They peeled back the layers of protection, and what they found confirmed their worst suspicions about corruption and collusion at levels that would shock the country. But they kept moving. If this episode had you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. Comment below.